Hi, welcome to Full Circle. I'm Emily Wilmson with the City of Fort Collins, and we are talking today about water and climate adaptation. And I have with me Bruce Hendy, the Chief Sustainability Officer for the city. Welcome, Bruce.
Hello.
And I have Kevin Gerdig, who is the Interim Director of Utilities. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you.
And we're here to talk really about climate change and water supply. So, Kevin, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about how climate change will affect our water supply in Fort Collins.
Certainly. Climate has continued to be erratic, and particularly those of us living in Colorado, we're very familiar with extreme events. However, in recent years, we began to observe much more warming in the climate and hence more stress on our water supplies. This is not only a problem in our area, but throughout the western part of the United States, where we are already in a semi-arid climate, and that climate is now really stressing and becoming very difficult to predict for water resource managers in the western part of the United States. The types of impacts that we may experience are more severe storms, perhaps longer periods of dry weather. We already have stress on a lot of our water storage reservoirs, and we don't have an ample supply for sustainability in much of the western part of the United States. More specifically in the Fort Collins area, we have been actively pursuing education and working with our customers to continue to reduce our water use. And that in turn, of course, will help enhance our ability to get through these extreme events. So it will be a continuum of modeling, of working with scientists such as National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Sciences and other agencies to really understand these significant changes in our climate as we move forward.
Okay, good to know. And from what I understand, Fort Collins has recently done a heat study. We're actually getting warmer already. Bruce, is that something you could address? Can you talk a little bit about that?
That is correct. The Rocky Mountain Climate Organization did a 50-year longitudinal study of heat. In Fort Collins in particular, they actually took that as a bellwether city looking at the Front Range and tracked it since 1961. And the tracking that they did really showed that in, say, 1961, we had an average of 3 days per summer that would be over 90 degrees, and as of 2012, that was 17 days. So, and that also tends to happen more in what we call heat spells, days of 3 gathered together over a high temperature. The projection, using the same data that they've done, same data trend line, shows that by the years 2040, 2050, that's going to increase dramatically. And I'd say, kind of based a little bit on what Kevin was just talking about, that has an impact that's even more dramatic in the West. Since we're a semi-arid area, we get an average of 16 inches of rainfall per year. And when we have changes in weather, it impacts an area like this more than it does, say, on the East Coast, where they get 60 to 80 inches of rainfall a year. So the climate change, I think, is real. The extreme heat study is pretty hard evidence that shows that with a high degree of probability that it's accurate, that we've got a trend here that I think we need to be aware of. Anything
you want to add on that,
Kevin? I would agree with that, and along with what Bruce has articulated, is that we as a community, specifically to Fort Collins, really need to be ahead of the curve and look at variability as well as looking ahead. In water management planning, we're not just looking ahead 2 years or 5 years. We really need to be looking ahead 50 years and beyond, and that's going to be critical for the sustainability and the great wellness and environmental factors that we so much enjoy in our region. So we're really going to look beyond, and we're going to have to be planning for these extreme events for our community and, of course, our businesses and our residences.
Okay. So what fires like the High Park fire are part of climate change? I mean, we obviously had a really bad couple of years with the flooding last year and the High Park fire. How does that affected our water supply, or how has that affected our water systems?
We are very fortunate along the Front Range to have outstanding water quality. However, that trend may not continue as we observe more dry events. In the case of High Park Fire, it was a natural cause fire due to lightning. However, the conditions leading up to the High Park Fire were extreme low humidity, and the conditions were very ripe for such an event. If you go back in history, it is not untypical to observe fires such as these. However, the urban wildland interface is becoming more dispersed, and hence not only do we have water quality issues and water impacts to residents of cities, but we also displace and have very negative effects with the residents in these regions. In addition, wildland fires, and particularly in the watershed of our forests, end up causing significant sediment loads. Those sediment loads in turn our rivers black, and it is very difficult to treat that water to the high quality water quality that our residents expect. So fires can be extremely challenging. We were fortunate in having 2 water supplies. We maintain that today, having both CBT, or Colorado Big Thompson water, which originates, of course, on the west slope, and that's piped through the Continental Divide and ends up in Horsetooth Reservoir, and we are able to use that water supply. So in the event of a fire, we do have contingency plans. However, all watersheds are vulnerable to wildland fires such as we observed in the High Park Fire. So that's something in our long-range forecasting we as water managers really need to be aware of and plan for alternative supplies during those events.
Now, Utilities has already taken some actions, like building this pre-sedimentation basin. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Certainly. We have 2 different points of diversion on the Poudre River. Our pre-sedimentation basin, located at the Gateway Natural Area, is one site. However, that was really not designed for the sediment load that we experienced with High Park Fire. Okay. Our other supply is off the Monroe Canal, which is just about a half a mile upstream from our Gateway Natural Area. And that actually goes through a tunnel which is not observed to the public and ends up exiting at the mouth of the canyon. That supply, we were able to build a pre-sedimentation basin in record time, below budget, to actually settle out these particulates that resulted from the High Park Fire. Wow. And then, as nature would have it, she once again really let us know who's in charge, and then we had the flood last September. And that flood really removed a lot of the sediment and the material in the riverbed. However, much of those slopes, and residents need to be aware, we still have a lot of sediment load, and unless we get plant regrowth, we can continue to have water quality problems anywhere from 5 to 8 years after a fire. So that pre-sedimentation basin, along with our original diversion at the Gateway Natural Area, is very critical for our staff to be able to remove the sediment prior to treatment, and then maintain that high quality water that our residents and our businesses expect in our area.
Okay, so any predictions on what's going to happen this year, weather-wise?
Again, as we've been talking, the risk analysis is entirely up to the types of conditions that we will experience, and it gets very complex with jet streams and climate and so forth. What we as a utility have to do again, though, is look at variability and the risk analysis and be prepared for any condition at any time. And that's one of the challenges that we and other colleagues have to work with each day in our planning process to maintain high quality water to our residents.
I think right now one of the ways we're doing that is through specific climate adaptation planning. And our Environmental Services Department, working together with the utilities, has been developing a climate adaptation strategy and trying to put that plan in place so that we'll have, I think part of what we're saying here is a message about resilience and being able to be resilient in the face of a lot of different kinds of weather patterns that might affect us, whether it's extreme rain like we had in September or the High Park Fire that we had in 2012. And so I think over the next year we're going to be really preparing a lot more, and that is both emergency preparedness as well as long-term resilience of the community and our ability to withstand climate change that's going to affect us.
And how does that affect our economy? How does climate change and how do these issues affect us in that way?
I think there's a couple ways. Start with the prolonged drought one. A lot of the businesses in our community are really water dependent. We have many breweries, as we know, Anheuser-Busch, New Belgium Brewing, Odell's, and others. We also have Avago and HP, and those companies are working with wafer microchips that have a lot of water requirements. And so if we have a prolonged drought and we end up struggling to be able to provide enough water, that's going to impact the bottom line for those companies and their ability to process and do the things they do. So in looking at resilience, I think that's one of those things that we really have to be good about, thinking about our business community at the same time as supplying drinking water. And it's really kind of an in-depth one. Second part of it is if we have extreme rainfall events, probably a little bit less of a threat. But if we have significant flooding that affects our ability to conduct business, there's another one that I think has a definite impact on us.
Right, exactly. So what are we doing to educate businesses and consumers in general about conservation? What are the things that the city's doing to educate folks about that?
Well, I think there's a couple things, and I'll let Kevin weigh in on this as well, but we have a pretty active water conservation program, and in addition to that, through the water conservation program, we'll go out and do water audits and make sure that your sprinkler system's as efficient as it can be. We have help with respect to plant pallets that you can use. The city itself, as an organization, is looking at our streetscapes and redeveloping our streetscapes to be far more drought tolerant. And for example, on Harmony Road in the last year and a half, we've completely redone a couple of medians there to be a far more drought tolerant native plant palette. And in addition to that, we're monitoring that. We actually have a software database that we're using that looks at the amount of water we use, plant health, and a variety of other areas. And we've got a whole horticulturist now that's also analyzing those plants. So as we gradually over time redevelop medians and create new medians in landscaping, we're trying to be good role models in the community about how you can be drought tolerant and then share that information with the community as well.
Anything to add to that?
In addition, we really have a lot of outreach to our key accounts and larger customers in the community, such as industrial customers. And the thing that's a wonderful and a beautiful thing about our community is our larger water users have really stepped up, and we've seen incredible reductions in terms of water conservation in a number of different industrial applications. And this is through a dialogue with both utilities and working with our clients and our customers on how they're using water use and how to better perhaps use efficiencies, and whether it's a cooling tower or whether it's washdowns, there's a variety of indicators that best practices can be implemented. And again, our community really has stepped up, and we will continue to have that outreach. We started at an early age in grade school and really have a lot of educational programs, not only just in water use and conservation, but also where our water comes from. And we feel that will be effective as well, because we need to remember that we're looking at future generations, and sustainable water supplies. Our young people of today will be those leaders of tomorrow, and we really need to start at that age. So that's been a great program as well.
Emily, I'd say we're having success too. The community has responded. When we've had droughts, we've asked the community to cut back on water use, and we have seen that come down. Residents have implemented a lot of new strategies around their personal landscapes, and we've seen the overall average gallons used per day come down pretty regularly. And then once we got past a drought, it stayed down.
Yeah.
So the behavior change was good, and I think we've got a great community to work with us on it.
That's a great point, actually. A question that's probably on a lot of people's minds is, will we have water restrictions this year?
This year, the outlook looks very favorable, and the answer to that is we do not expect any issues this year regarding water supply. However, we still want to urge our residents to conserve water, use it appropriately. They have a variety of mechanisms to look at evapotranspiration rates and daily that's published in local news as well as on the internet. And also, we will perform audits on sprinkler systems, work with clients. So even though the forecast looks good in terms of water supply and our storage reservoirs, we will continue our campaigns and our education in terms of prudent use of water supply in our area.
Yeah, the point being, we're still in the West, right? There's another drought around the corner somewhere, right? Is that correct? Okay? So you guys are doing some pretty innovative things with regard to water conservation and things like, I don't know that we're doing this here in the city, but can you talk a little bit about some of the regulations on gray water and how that might someday be something we could look into, or what's maybe explain to folks what that is. So
I'll let Bruce maybe start off, and then I'll follow up on that.
okay, we'll have Bruce do that.
Well, long term, I think if you took a concept of net zero water, for example, the idea is if you get 16 inches of rainfall, and basically that translates to every square inch gets 16 inches of water put on top of it a year. That's our annual rainfall combined with water and snow. And if you take that idea and you say we're going to implement net zero water strategies, that translates to identifying what your footprint is and saying that we're not going to use any more than that total water that falls. That's a long-term strategy. It takes a lot of work to get there. We've got a number of folks in the community that are in the business community that are working around that concept right now. In fact, we have tying that to economic health, we have a Colorado Water Innovation Cluster. And that Water Innovation Cluster is specifically looking at strategies such as that one. They're also looking at in-stream water quality. Kevin mentioned a little bit earlier about the water runoff from the mountains. One of the projects is to have in-stream monitors that monitor water quality on a regular basis so that the water that does get to us is drinkable and usable by the time it gets to the treatment plant. And gray water is another one that that we would like to work on. Gray water is the idea of capturing some of our water that we use in our homes and offices and being able to reuse that water in another way or use it again. Colorado water law has some issues that we're working through right now, and yet ideally we'd like to have something like that, and would be tackling that through the Colorado Water Innovation Cluster.
Okay, great. And who's on the Colorado Water Innovation Cluster? Who sits in that group? I mean, generally, what types of businesses? And
yeah, well, there's a variety group. We have an engineering firm there. We've got multiple engineers. I think Kevin's been on that board. I don't know if you're still on there today, but you've been on that board. And we have breweries. Some of the breweries involved, they sit on it because they have a vested interest. And we've got people that are specialists in irrigation water and water rights law. And so it's a pretty comprehensive group. And that group it's a pretty new group, really. It's only been about a year and a half old, but really developing, I think, some interesting ideas around the water space.
Great. Okay. Well, it's probably about time to wrap up. So, Kevin, any thoughts that you want to leave people with as we leave this topic today?
Certainly. Well, one thing is for certain. I just brought a few texts, but for example, the impact of climate change on water and health. I literally have dozens of publications. This one is World Water, Water Stewardship, Protecting Resources for a Secure Future. It's very apparent that we as water managers, city leaders, and our citizens, we must meet the challenge, and that begins with education. It begins with really evaluating how much water do we really need in our daily activities, and then there may be some subtle paradigm shifts in terms of how we use water, such as what we just alluded to with gray water, and it may be we really need to change some lifestyles. But one thing is for certain. We really need to plan for the future. We live in a wonderful community. We love the environment, but we're all connected by water. It's the most essential element that we have in life. So as we work towards those challenges, we need to innovate. We need to collaborate. We need to cooperate with others, and we certainly need to look long range in terms of meeting the new stressors related to climate change. And this is going to require a lot of work by many agencies, and we all have a stake in terms of meeting that challenge.
Okay, great. Thank you. Bruce, any thoughts from you?
I would say that if we have one big threat to the resilience of our city, it's probably water, given our semi-arid climate. So I really applaud the work of many in our community, including our water utility, that are looking at those long-term strategies. And it's a big challenge ahead of us, but I think we've got the right people to do the work.
Great. Well, thank you, Bruce, and thank you, Kevin, for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Full Circle.